It stands deep in the forest, a perfect medieval fortress with towers and gates. But the gates have never opened for a family. Legend says madness struck the owner before the final stone was laid, leaving this castle to rot in the woods for 100 years. The year was 1876, when Ralph Dundas first stood on that mountainside and imagined eternity. He was a man of industry, of railroads and steel, of the new American wealth that could reshape landscapes according to will. His fortune had been built in the harsh crucible of post-Civil War expansion, and now, in middle age, he wanted to build something that would last beyond ledgers and contracts, something beautiful, something worthy of the woman he loved. His wife deserved more than a mansion. Every wealthy man in New York had a mansion. She deserved a castle, a structure that would transport them from the industrial grime of the Gilded Age into something older, more romantic, more permanent. He had seen the Gothic. Cathedrals of Europe during their honeymoon had walked through the ancient keeps of Scotland where stone remembered centuries. That was what he would give her. Not just wealth, but immortality in architecture. The location itself was chosen with care. The Catskills were far enough from the city to feel like another world, yet close enough that the journey would not be impossible. The specific ridge he selected offered views that stretched for miles, a kingdom of green valleys and distant peaks. When the morning fog rolled through, it would look like their castle floated above the clouds. Medieval lords had chosen their sites for defense. Ralph Dundas chose his for beauty. He hired architects who had studied in Paris and London, men who understood that Gothic revival was not mere imitation, but interpretation. They drew plans for towers that would pierce the sky, for great halls with vaulted ceilings, for a library that could hold 10,000 volumes. There would be carved gargoyles and stained glass windows imported from France. There would be a grand staircase of marble that curved like a frozen waterfall. Every detail mattered because every detail would last forever. The scale of his ambition became clear when the first stones arrived. Massive blocks of grey granite, each one weighing more than a horse, had to be hauled up the mountain on specially constructed roads. Ralph had hired Scottish stonemasons, men whose grandfathers had built cathedrals, who knew how to make stone sing. He brought in Italian craftsmen for the decorative work, German woodcarvers for the interior panels. This would not be some nouveau riche showpiece slapped together by local labor. This would be authentic. Money flowed like a river. Tens of thousands of dollars became hundreds of thousands. The construction consumed his attention the way his businesses once had. He rode up the mountain every week to inspect progress, to approve designs, to ensure that reality matched vision. His wife came with him sometimes, watching the walls rise stone by stone, smiling at his enthusiasm. She would tease him gently about his obsession, but she understood. This castle was how he said, "I love you," in granite and glass. The workers whispered among themselves, though. Building something so grand in such isolation felt wrong to them, touched by hubris. The mountain resisted their efforts. Winter storms destroyed months of work. Tools went missing. Men fell ill with fevers that had no name. But Ralph pushed forward, pouring more money into the project, hiring more workers, refusing to see these as omens. He was creating something permanent in a world of change. Nothing would stop him. The construction of a Gothic castle in the wilderness requires more than money and vision. It requires an almost religious devotion to impossibility. Ralph Dundas had both, and for years the mountain echoed with the sound of hammers striking stone, of saws cutting through ancient timber, of men shouting in half a dozen languages as they wrestled architecture from raw earth. The Scottish masons arrived first, in the spring of 1877. These were not ordinary workers, but craftsmen who carried their families' techniques in their hands like inherited memory. They looked at Ralph's plans and nodded slowly. recognizing the ambition. One of them, a man named McGregor, whose father had worked on the Edinburgh monuments, told Ralph that stone had its own will. You could not force it. You had to listen to what it wanted to become. Ralph, impatient with such mysticism, simply doubled his wages. The foundation alone took 8 months. They had to blast into the mountain's bedrock to create a stable base, and every explosion felt like a violation. The workers said the mountain fought back. Equipment would fail without explanation. Ropes would snap under loads they should have held. One morning, they arrived to find an entire section of freshly laid foundation cracked, straight through, as if something beneath had shifted in the night. The engineers insisted it was merely settling, but the laborers crossed themselves and whispered about curses. Still, the walls began to rise. Grey granite blocks, each one precisely cut and fitted, climbed toward the sky in the Gothic style Ralph had demanded. The progress was agonizingly slow. A medieval cathedral might take a century to complete. Ralph wanted his castle finished in 5 years. He threw more workers at the problem, housing them in rough camps around the construction site. At the project's peak, over 200 men lived on that mountainside, a temporary city devoted to one man's dream. The materials came from everywhere. Slate for the roof was quarried in Vermont and hauled by rail and wagon. The stained glass windows were crafted in workshops in Lyon, France, each panel depicting scenes from medieval romances. Oak beams for the Great Hall came from forests in Pennsylvania. Trees that had stood for 300 years, now repurposed into ceiling supports that would last 300 more. Iron for the hinges and hardware was forged on-site by a blacksmith Ralph had lured away from a Pittsburgh steel mill. Nothing was ordinary, everything was excessive. The financial drain became legendary even among New York's wealthy elite. Railroad barons and banking magnates who thought themselves immune to shock would hear the latest expenditure and shake their heads in disbelief. $100,000 became $200,000. $200,000 became $500,000. Ralph's business partners began asking uncomfortable questions. Was he neglecting his actual enterprises for this folly? His answer was always the same, measured smile. "Some men collect art," he would say. "I am building it." But something was changing in Ralph himself. Those who visited the construction site noticed it first. He had always been intense, driven, but now there was a quality of desperation in his supervision. He would spend entire nights at the site, sleeping in a rough cabin, inspecting work by lamplight. He began to see flaws where his architects saw perfection. A window was 3 inches too far to the left. A stone's color was slightly wrong. Tear it out. Do it again. The workers began to fear his inspections more than the dangerous work itself. His wife came less frequently now. When she did visit, she would stand apart from the construction, looking not at the rising walls but at her husband. Friends later recalled that she seemed worried, though about what they could not say. Perhaps she saw what was happening before anyone else did. Perhaps she understood that the castle was no longer being built for her. It was being built instead of her, consuming the man she loved and transforming him into something she no longer recognized. The local people, those who lived in the valleys below, developed their own relationship with the castle. They could see it from miles away, this impossible structure growing on the ridge like a stone tumor. It did not belong there. It violated something fundamental about the landscape. The Catskills had their own architecture, their own way of fitting human structures into natural spaces. This Gothic monstrosity imposed itself, declared dominance, demanded attention. Some said it was magnificent. Others said it was an abomination. Most felt both things at once. Strange stories began to circulate. Workers reported hearing voices in empty rooms, seeing shadows move where no one stood. Tools would disappear and reappear in impossible locations. One mason swore he saw a woman in white walking the unfinished battlements at midnight, though no women were allowed on the construction site after dark. These tales were dismissed as the superstitions of uneducated men, the product of exhaustion and isolation. But the stories persisted, grew, multiplied. By 1880, the castle was nearly complete. The towers stood finished against the sky. The roof was on. The windows were installed. Interior work continued, but the structure itself had achieved the form Ralph had imagined that day 4 years earlier. It looked exactly as a Gothic castle should look, transported somehow from medieval Europe to the American wilderness. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was almost ready to become a home. Almost. The final year of construction should have been a time of celebration. Instead, it became a period of whispers, of glances exchanged between servants, of letters sent to concerned relatives. Something was wrong in the Dundas household, though no one could quite name what it was. Ralph's obsession with perfection had crossed from dedication into mania. He would wake in the middle of the night, convinced that a particular stone needed replacing, that a column was misaligned by fractions of an inch that only he could perceive. His architects tried to reassure him. The castle was structurally sound, aesthetically magnificent. But reassurance meant nothing to a man who could see flaws invisible to everyone else. He fired 3 different project supervisors in the span of 6 months, each one guilty of the crime of accepting good enough when Ralph demanded impossible. The workers noticed his eyes. They had changed somehow, become distant and fevered at the same time. When he walked through the construction site now, he did not see men. He saw obstacles, inefficiencies, potential failures. His presence, once inspiring, had become oppressive. Men who had worked on the project for years began to quit, willing to forfeit their wages rather than endure another day under his increasingly erratic supervision. But the real concern centered on his wife. She had stopped visiting the castle entirely by 1881. Society pages that once mentioned her frequent trips to oversee the construction now made no mention of her at all. Friends who called at the Dundas residence in the city were told she was indisposed, resting, not receiving visitors. The explanations varied, but the result remained constant. No one saw her. Rumors began their inevitable work. Some said she had suffered a nervous collapse, overwhelmed by her husband's obsession with the castle. Others whispered darker things, that Ralph's madness had infected her, that she wandered the halls of their city home, talking to people who were not there. A few suggested the opposite, that it was not the wife but the husband whose mind had fractured, that his behavior at the construction site was merely the visible symptom of a deeper break with reality. The truth, as always, was more complicated and more painful than gossip could capture. Whatever was happening within the Dundas marriage, it was happening behind closed doors, in private conversations that left no record. What is known is this: by the summer of 1881, Mrs. Dundas was sent away. The official story spoke of a rest cure, a fashionable remedy for female nervous disorders. She went to a private facility, a sanitarium whose reputation depended on discretion. She would recover there, away from the stresses of society and the endless construction that had consumed her husband's life. Or perhaps that is not what happened at all. Perhaps it was Ralph himself who was committed, his delusions about the castle finally recognized as symptoms rather than eccentricities. The records are unclear, contradictory, suspiciously vague. What is certain is that someone in the Dundas family was institutionalized, and that the castle, so nearly complete, suddenly found itself without its animating spirit. Ralph still came to the mountain, but less frequently now. The frantic energy had drained away, replaced by something worse. Emptiness. He would stand in the great hall, surrounded by the carved wood and stone he had demanded, and see nothing. The workers said it was like watching a ghost haunt his own creation. He gave fewer orders, made fewer demands, just stood there, looking at what he had built, as if trying to remember why it had mattered. The castle itself seemed to sense the change. Completion was so close. The grand staircase was finished. The library shelves were installed. The bedrooms were ready for furniture that would never arrive. Only the final touches remained, the small details that transform a structure into a home. But those touches required someone who cared, and Ralph Dundas had stopped caring about details. He had stopped caring about anything. His business associates became alarmed. The castle had already consumed a fortune, and now it seemed to be consuming the man himself. They tried to intervene, suggesting he sell the property, cut his losses, return to the work that had made him wealthy. But Ralph would not hear of abandonment. The castle would be completed. It had to be completed. He had promised. Promised whom? His wife, vanished into medical custody. Himself, that younger version who had stood on this mountain and imagined eternity. The workers who had given years of their lives to this vision. No one knew anymore, possibly not even Ralph. The local population watched the drama with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. The wealthy man who had thought he could impose his will on the mountain was learning otherwise. The Catskills did not welcome castles. They tolerated farmhouses and modest lodges, structures that knew their place. But this Gothic monstrosity, this declaration of permanence and power, the mountain would never accept it. Some said the land itself had driven the Dundas family mad. Others said madness had built the castle, not the other way around. By the autumn of 1881, work on the castle had effectively stopped. A skeleton crew remained, more caretakers than builders, maintaining what had already been completed while waiting for orders that came less and less frequently. The great dream was ending not with triumph, but with a whimper, with confusion, with the slow realization that something essential had been lost along the way. Ralph Dundas had set out to build immortality in stone. Instead, he had built a monument to obsession, a structure that would outlast him but never shelter him. The castle stood almost complete, almost perfect, almost ready. Almost is the saddest word in any language, and it was the only word that mattered now. Death came for Ralph Dundas in the winter of 1882, sudden and without ceremony. The man who had spent years planning every detail of his Gothic palace had no time to plan his own ending. One day he was alive, the next he was not, and the castle he had built stood empty, a monument without a mourner. The circumstances of his death remain frustratingly vague. Some records suggest a heart condition, the physical toll of years spent driving himself and everyone around him toward an impossible standard. Others hint at something more ambiguous, a decline that was as much spiritual as physical. A man can die from a broken heart just as surely as from a failing one, and Ralph Dundas had invested his entire heart into stone and mortar. He died in his city residence, not in the castle. This detail carries its own weight. The Gothic palace he had spent half a decade and a fortune creating remained unseen by him in its nearly finished state. He never slept in its bedrooms, never read in its library, never climbed that magnificent marble staircase he had obsessed over. The building existed, complete in almost every detail, but Ralph Dundas never truly arrived. His wife, wherever she was, received the news behind the walls of her sanitarium. There is no record of her attending his funeral. Perhaps she was too unwell to travel. Perhaps the family deemed it improper. Perhaps she simply chose not to come, finding in his death a kind of liberation from the obsession that had consumed their marriage. We will never know what she felt, standing in whatever room they had given her, learning that the man who had built a castle for her love had died without ever giving her the keys. The funeral was attended by business associates and distant relatives, people who had known Ralph the industrialist, but not Ralph the dreamer. They spoke the usual platitudes about his accomplishments, his business acumen, his contributions to the railroad industry. Almost no one mentioned the castle. It had become an embarrassment, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Better to focus on the respectable parts of his legacy and let the Gothic folly fade into awkward silence. But the castle could not fade. It stood on its mountain ridge, visible for miles, impossible to ignore. And now it had no owner, no purpose, no future. Ralph's estate was a complicated mess of debts and assets, and the castle represented the worst of both. It had consumed resources that might have been invested in profitable ventures. It was worth nothing to anyone because who would buy such a thing? Who needed a Gothic palace in the Catskills? The workers who remained were dismissed immediately. Without Ralph's driving force and endless funds, there was no reason to continue. The castle was perhaps 95% complete. Just a few more weeks of work and it would have been finished. But those final 5% would remain forever undone. The building was close enough to completion to be heartbreaking, but not complete enough to be useful. Within months, the castle began its first phase of abandonment. The furniture that had been ordered never arrived. The paintings meant for the walls stayed in warehouses. The books intended for the library gathered dust in storage. The building had rooms but no life, windows but no light from within, doors but no one to open them. It stood waiting for inhabitants who would never come. Local people began to avoid the road that passed near it. The castle had always felt wrong, but now it felt cursed. Everyone knew the story by now, knew about the mad builder and his institutionalized wife, knew about the death that came before the dream could be realized. The building seemed to embody failure and tragedy, and no one wanted those feelings seeping into their own lives. Some tried to justify what had happened. Ralph had been too proud, they said, too ambitious. He had tried to create something permanent in an impermanent world, and the universe had punished his hubris. Others were more sympathetic, seeing him as a romantic who had simply loved too much, wanted too much, given too much. Both interpretations missed the essential tragedy. Ralph Dundas had built a castle to express love and ended up expressing only obsession. The castle's reputation darkened with each passing season. Stories multiplied. People claimed to see lights in the windows, though no one had electricity or reason to be inside. Others reported hearing sounds, voices echoing from the empty Great Hall, footsteps on the marble stairs. Were these genuine experiences or the projection of expectation onto an already unsettling structure? Does it matter? The effect was the same. The castle became haunted not necessarily by ghosts, but by the weight of its own story. Ralph's wife eventually left the sanitarium, though when and in what condition remains unknown. She never came to claim the castle. Perhaps she could not bear to see it. Perhaps she had never wanted it in the first place. Perhaps for her, the building represented not love, but the thing that had destroyed love, the obsession that had stolen her husband long before death did. And so the Gothic palace stood abandoned, less than a decade after its construction began. Not destroyed by time or disaster, but by the simple fact that the person who had willed it into existence was gone, and no one else could imagine a use for such a thing. It was too grand to ignore, too expensive to maintain, too strange to inhabit. It existed in a limbo between architecture and ruin, a structure that had never lived, but could not quite die. The dream had ended. The nightmare was just beginning. The castle entered its long silence. 20 years passed, then 30, then 40. Seasons cycled through their familiar patterns, but inside the Gothic walls, time moved differently. Without human presence to mark its passage, the years collapsed into a single extended moment of decay and stillness. Nature began its patient work of reclamation. Vines crept up the grey stone walls, finding purchase in the mortar between blocks. Birds nested in the towers, their droppings streaking the carefully cut granite. Rain found its way through gaps in the slate roof, pooling on floors that had never felt the weight of furniture or the warmth of human feet. The stained glass windows, those expensive imports from France, began to crack under the pressure of expanding frames and the thermal stress of seasons. The local population developed an uneasy relationship with the abandoned structure. Parents warned children to stay away, though this naturally made the castle irresistible to the young and brave. Teenagers would dare each other to approach its walls, to touch the massive oak doors, to peer through broken windows into the darkness beyond. Most lost their nerve before getting close. The few who made it inside came back changed, quieter, reluctant to describe what they had seen or felt. The stories multiplied with each telling. A farmer swore he saw a woman in Victorian dress standing at a tower window, watching the valley below. When he looked again, she was gone. A hunter claimed to hear music. A waltz played on a piano that did not exist in a ballroom that had never hosted a dance. Young couples who sought the castle's isolation for romantic purposes would flee instead, terrified by sounds they could not explain and presences they could not see. Were these encounters real or imagined? The question misses the point. The castle had become a repository for the community's fears and fascinations, a blank screen onto which people projected their own relationship with death, failure, and abandoned dreams. In a way, it served a function after all, just not the one Ralph Dundas had intended. Instead of housing a family, it housed the collective unconscious of the region. The building's physical deterioration accelerated through the early 1900s. Weather was the primary destroyer, but human hands contributed. Vandals broke in periodically, smashing what remained of the windows, prying decorative elements from walls, scratching their names into woodwork that master craftsmen had carved. Some came looking for salvage, hoping to strip copper pipes or valuable fixtures. They usually left empty-handed and unsettled, reporting that the castle did not want to be touched, that attempting to remove anything felt somehow wrong. The Great Depression brought new meaning to the abandoned palace. While families lost their homes and fortunes evaporated, the castle stood as a monument to waste. Here was a structure that could have housed dozens of families, built with money that could have fed thousands, now serving no purpose except to rot. Some saw it as divine judgment on the excess of the Gilded Age. Others saw it simply as sad, a reminder that all human ambitions eventually meet the same indifferent fate. By the 1930s, the castle's reputation had solidified into local legend. It was cursed. This was not speculation, but accepted fact among the people who lived in its shadow. The curse had killed Ralph Dundas, had driven his wife mad, and now it waited for anyone foolish enough to claim the property. Real estate agents stopped trying to sell it. No one wanted to be responsible for whatever happened to the next owner. The building developed a personality in the collective imagination. It was not merely abandoned, but actively malevolent, jealous of the life it had never experienced, hungry for the warmth it had been denied. People reported feeling watched when they passed near it. Dogs refused to approach. Horses would shy away from the road that led to its gates. Whether these reactions stemmed from genuine supernatural presence or from the animals sensing their owner's fear is impossible to determine. What is certain is that the castle survived when logic suggested it should not. Structures require maintenance to remain standing. Roofs need repair. Foundations need drainage. Without these interventions, buildings collapse within decades. Yet the castle persisted, its walls still vertical, its towers still reaching toward the sky. Perhaps this was simply a testament to the quality of the Scottish masons' work. Or perhaps, as locals whispered, something wanted the castle to remain, some force that was not ready to release its hold on the physical world. World War II came and went. The castle stood. The post-war boom transformed the Catskills into a tourist destination. The castle stood. Modern houses with electricity and indoor plumbing sprouted in the valleys. The castle stood increasingly anachronistic, a Gothic shadow from another century that refused to fade into history. By mid-century, the castle had outlasted its creator by 70 years. It had stood empty longer than Ralph Dundas had lived. The building he imagined as a home for future generations had instead become a home for nothing, a space that existed between human intention and natural reclamation, belonging fully to neither, claimed completely by both. And still, against all reason and expectation, it waited. For what? No one could say. But the waiting itself became part of the castle's character, part of its curse. It was a structure built to house life that instead housed absence, and that absence had weight, had presence, had power. The Gothic palace Ralph Dundas built for love had become something else entirely, something he never intended and could not have imagined, something that was just beginning its strange second act. In the 1950s, something unexpected happened. The cursed castle found new owners, and they were not afraid. The Freemasons, that ancient fraternal order with its mysteries and rituals, looked at the abandoned Gothic palace and saw not a haunted ruin, but an opportunity. Here was a structure built for ceremony, for grandeur, for the kind of symbolic architecture that resonated with their traditions. The curse meant nothing to men who dealt in allegory and metaphor. They purchased the property for a fraction of what it had cost to build. The Masons were practical about their acquisition. They did not intend to restore the castle to Ralph Dundas's original vision. That ship had sailed decades ago, lost along with the man himself. Instead, they would adapt what remained, make it functional for their purposes, transform a monument to failed domesticity into a space for ritual and fraternal gathering. The Gothic architecture, with its soaring ceilings and dramatic shadows, suited their needs perfectly. The building had been waiting for someone to give it purpose. The Masons believed they were that someone. The first task was making the structure safe and weather-tight. Masons from the local lodge arrived with tools and lumber, ready to repair what decades of abandonment had damaged. They replaced sections of the roof, patched holes in walls, installed basic plumbing and electricity. The work was competent but not luxurious. These were men who understood the value of a dollar and saw no reason to waste money on cosmetic perfection. Function mattered. The rest was vanity. As they worked, they encountered the castle's strangeness firsthand. Tools would disappear and reappear in different rooms. Measurements taken one day would be different the next, as if the building itself shifted in the night. Several workers reported feeling watched, hearing footsteps in empty corridors, experiencing sudden drops in temperature that had no rational explanation. But Masons are not easily spooked. Their rituals involve death and rebirth, darkness and light. A few unexplained phenomena were not enough to drive them away. They began using the castle for their meetings in the late 1950s. The Great Hall, which Ralph had imagined filled with family gatherings and elegant dinners, now hosted men in aprons and regalia, performing ceremonies that dated back centuries. The marble staircase became a processional route. The library, still empty of books, served as a preparation room. The towers, those Gothic spires reaching toward heaven, became symbolic elements in the Masons' cosmology, representing aspiration and transcendence. For a time, the arrangement seemed to work. The castle had life again, not the domestic warmth Ralph had intended, but life nonetheless. On meeting nights, light would shine from the windows for the first time in 70 years. Voices would echo in the halls, not the ghostly whispers of legend, but the actual voices of living men engaged in their fraternal business. Cars would park along the access road. Smoke would rise from chimneys. The building functioned, but the castle never truly welcomed them. The masons who used it most frequently began to notice patterns. Objects would move overnight. Symbols they had carefully placed would be found disturbed, as if some other presence was rearranging things according to different rules. The temperature in certain rooms remained perpetually cold, regardless of heating efforts. Some members began to dread their turns at night watch, when tradition required someone to remain in the building alone until dawn. The stories they told among themselves were different from the legends circulated by locals. The Masons reported seeing not the woman in Victorian dress, but shadows that moved with apparent purpose. Shapes that seemed almost human, but not quite. They heard not music, but something closer to breathing, as if the building itself had lungs. One brother swore he encountered a figure on the grand staircase, a man in 19th century clothing who simply stood there, staring, before fading into nothing. Despite these experiences, or perhaps because of them, the Masons persisted. Their philosophical framework could accommodate mystery and the unknown. They were comfortable with liminality, with spaces between worlds. If the castle was haunted, well, that made it more appropriate for their purposes, not less. The rituals they performed dealt explicitly with mortality and what might lie beyond. A genuine supernatural presence would simply confirm what they already believed about the universe's hidden dimensions. The local population watched this development with mixed feelings. On one hand, the Masons were respectable members of the community, businessmen and professionals whose involvement lent legitimacy to the property. The other hand, their secretive rituals and closed-door ceremonies only added to the castle's mysterious reputation. What exactly were they doing in there? The Masons, bound by their oaths, would not say. The silence fed speculation. The Masonic occupation lasted roughly 2 decades, longer than Ralph Dundas had lived to see his creation. During that time, the castle served its first genuine purpose beyond simply existing. But it was never a comfortable arrangement. The building's maintenance costs remained astronomical. The remote location made regular use difficult, especially in winter when snow made the mountain roads treacherous. Membership in the local lodge declined through the 70s and 80s, following broader trends away from fraternal organizations. Fewer men meant fewer dues, and fewer dues meant less money available for the castle's upkeep. The decision to abandon the property came gradually, without drama. Meeting frequency decreased. Maintenance became sporadic. By the mid-1980s, the lodge had effectively stopped using the castle, though they maintained nominal ownership for a few more years. The building had defeated them as surely as it had defeated Ralph Dundas, not through supernatural malevolence, but through the simple grinding reality of time and expense. When the Masons finally relinquished the property in the late 80s, they left behind traces of their occupation. Masonic symbols remained carved into door frames and etched into walls. The meeting hall still contained benches they had installed. Ritual objects, forgotten or deliberately abandoned, remained in storage rooms. The castle now carried 2 layers of history, 2 failed attempts to give it meaning and purpose. The local lodge members spoke carefully about their time in the castle. They acknowledged the difficulty of maintaining such a structure. They mentioned the declining membership and changing priorities. But when pressed about why they really left, why they had given up on a property that seemed ideally suited to their needs, their answers became vague. It was not right, some said. It did not want us there, others admitted. The building resisted being used, even by those who approached it with respect and serious intent. What the Masons discovered, though few said it explicitly, was that the castle had developed its own identity during those decades of abandonment. It was no longer simply an empty structure waiting to be filled. It had become something else, something that existed in relationship to absence rather than presence. Ralph Dundas had built it to house life, but life had never taken root. The building had adapted to emptiness, had made emptiness its essential nature. The Masons tried to impose meaning from outside, but the castle's meaning came from within, from its own history of failure and loss. And so the Gothic palace returned to abandonment, this time with additional layers of strangeness and story. It by Stun was no longer just the cursed castle where a mad builder died. It was also the Masonic lodge that could not be held, the building that defeated even men whose rituals dealt explicitly with death and the unknown. The curse, if it existed, was not about supernatural evil, but about something more subtle and more powerful. The building's absolute resistance to being anything other than what it had become. A monument to absence, a palace of emptiness, a structure that existed not to shelter life, but to remind the living of impermanence, of the ultimate futility of all human attempts to create something that lasts. The Masons had believed they understood mortality and transcendence. The castle taught them lessons they had not expected to learn. When the last Mason locked the heavy oak doors for the final time, the castle returned to its true purpose, standing empty, waiting for nothing, slowly returning to the earth from which Ralph Dundas had forced it to rise all those years ago. The second act was over. The final decline could begin. The 1990s brought the castle into its final form. Without the Masons' minimal maintenance, without any human presence to slow the inevitable, decay accelerated. What had been arrested deterioration became active collapse. The building began its transformation from abandoned structure to genuine ruin, from something that might theoretically be saved to something beyond all redemption. Water was the primary destroyer. The roof repairs the Masons had made lasted only a few years before failing. Rain found its way through gaps in the slate, pooling in the attic spaces, soaking into wooden beams that had stood dry for over a century. Wood that had been harvested from Pennsylvania forests and shaped by master craftsmen began to rot. Support beams weakened. Ceilings sagged. In some rooms, entire sections of the upper floors collapsed, sending debris crashing down into the spaces below. The basement flooded. This was perhaps the most dramatic change, the transformation that pushed the castle from merely abandoned to genuinely apocalyptic in appearance. Water seeped in from the mountain itself, that same bedrock Ralph Dundas had blasted to create his foundation, now reclaiming what had been taken. The water was cold, mineral dark, perpetual. It filled the lower level to depths of several feet, turning the basement into something between a pool and a swamp. The flooding created perfect conditions for mold and fungal growth. Black stains spread up the walls like inverse shadows. The stained glass windows, those expensive imports from France that had survived nearly a century, began to fail in earnest. Some were destroyed by vandals throwing rocks. Others simply gave way to age, the lead channels that held the glass pieces corroding until the entire window collapsed inward in a shower of colored fragments. Each broken window accelerated the interior decay, allowing weather direct access to spaces Ralph had intended to keep pristine and protected. Graffiti appeared on the walls. Urban explorers and local teenagers discovered the castle in the internet age, drawn by photographs and rumors circulating online. They came with spray paint and markers, leaving their marks on stone and plaster. Some of the graffiti was crude tags and profanity. Some was more artistic, elaborate murals that acknowledged the building's Gothic character. A few pieces seemed almost reverential, as if the artists recognized they were adding their small chapter to a larger story. The castle became a destination for a particular type of visitor. Not families or tourists seeking conventional entertainment, but people drawn to decay and abandonment, to places where human ambition had failed spectacularly. They came with cameras, documenting the ruins' photogenic qualities. The castle was remarkably beautiful in its destruction. Light streaming through broken windows created dramatic effects. The flooded basement reflected what remained of the ceilings, creating surreal, doubled images. Vegetation growing through cracked walls provided organic contrast to the rigid Gothic geometry. These visitors shared their photographs online, and the castle's digital reputation grew. It appeared on lists of abandoned places, on urban exploration forums, in collections of supposedly haunted locations. Each photograph seemed to capture something different, some unique quality of decay and persistence. The building photographed differently depending on season, time of day, weather conditions. In morning fog, it looked like something from a fairy tale. In harsh afternoon light, it revealed every crack and stain. At dusk, it became genuinely ominous, a shadow against the darkening sky. But physical visitation came with risks. The structure was profoundly unsafe. Floors could collapse without warning. Stairs had gaps where treads had rotted away. Broken glass littered every surface. The flooded basement was not only deep, but contaminated with mold and bacteria. Rusty metal protruded from walls at head height. Every year brought news of someone injured while exploring the castle, usually teenagers who underestimated the dangers or overestimated their own caution. Local authorities struggled with how to handle the property. It was private land, technically, though ownership had become unclear through decades of legal limbo. They could not legally prevent people from entering, but they also could not ensure anyone's safety. Warning signs were posted and immediately torn down by souvenir hunters. The access road was blocked multiple times, and multiple times the blocks were removed. The castle drew people with a force that mere prohibition could not counter. Film crews discovered the location in the 2000s. The castle's Gothic architecture and genuinely apocalyptic atmosphere made it perfect for horror movies, music videos, and fashion photography that required a certain dark aesthetic. Productions would arrive with permits obtained through unclear channels, set up elaborate lighting, spend a day shooting in the ruins, and then disappear. The castle became a character in various low-budget films, usually playing itself, a cursed, abandoned palace where terrible things had happened. The local population's attitude had evolved over the decades. The curse was still discussed, but now with a kind of pride. This was their cursed castle, a landmark that put their small corner of the Catskills on the map. Tour guides would point it out from distant overlooks. Local businesses sold postcards featuring the ruins. The building that had once been an embarrassment had become a strange sort of tourist attraction, famous precisely for being a failure. Yet even as the castle became more publicly known, it remained fundamentally mysterious. No amount of photographs could fully capture what it felt like to stand inside those walls. The scale was wrong somehow, larger than expected, but also more intimate. The acoustics created strange echoes, voices seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The temperature fluctuated without obvious cause, cold spots appearing in summer heat, warm drafts blowing through in winter. People who spent significant time in the castle reported consistent experiences. A feeling of being watched, the sense that you were intruding on something that had nothing to do with you. Sudden emotional shifts, from melancholy to anxiety to inexplicable sadness. Were these genuine supernatural phenomena or psychological responses to being in a space so thoroughly saturated with failure and death? The question became irrelevant. The experience was real regardless of its source. The building continued to collapse slowly, dramatically, in ways that seemed almost theatrical. A tower would lose its top section in a storm, creating a jagged, broken silhouette. A wall would develop a crack that spread over months, creating abstract patterns that looked almost intentional. The marble staircase, that showpiece Ralph had obsessed over, began to separate from the walls, individual steps tilting at dangerous angles. Every season brought new damage, new configurations of ruin. By the 2010s, the castle had achieved a kind of equilibrium in its decay. It was falling apart, but slowly enough that it would stand in some form for decades more. The Scottish masons' work, that foundation blasted into bedrock, remained fundamentally sound. The walls were still vertical, even as everything else failed. The basic structure persisted despite the loss of every detail that had made it beautiful. It was becoming less a building and more a sculpture, a massive work of accidental art created through the collaboration of human ambition and natural entropy. The castle in this era looked exactly like what it was, a literal horror movie set, a Gothic nightmare made real, a vision of architectural doom. It was no longer possible to imagine it as Ralph Dundas had intended it. The dream had been so thoroughly replaced by reality that even trying to picture the original vision felt like an act of imagination rather than memory. This was its true form now, not the failed home, but the successful ruin, not what it was meant to be, but what it had become. Visitors in the 2010s and beyond were experiencing something Ralph Dundas never intended but inadvertently created, a space outside normal time where past and present collapsed into each other, where human ambition met absolute defeat, where beauty and horror coexisted in the same crumbling walls. The castle had become what it was always going to become, what perhaps it needed to become. Not a home, but a monument. Not to love, but to loss. Not to permanence, but to the beautiful, terrible inevitability of decay. And still it stood, against all logic and expectation, refusing to fully collapse, refusing to completely surrender to the mountain that had never wanted it. The Gothic spires, though damaged and dangerous, still reached toward the sky. The Great Hall, though flooded and ruined, still maintained its dimensions and proportions. The building endured not as Ralph Dundas intended, but in its own strange way, on its own uncompromising terms. The curse, if it had ever existed, had transformed into something else. Not a supernatural force, but a historical weight, the accumulated gravity of over a century of failure and abandonment. The castle taught everyone who encountered it the same lesson. Nothing material lasts, nothing human endures, and all our attempts to create permanence are revealed, eventually, as beautiful illusions. This was the castle's gift and its curse, its purpose and its poison. It stood as proof that time defeats everything, but also that even defeated things maintain their power, their presence, their ability to haunt the living with everything they represent. Stand at the base of the castle today and look up. What you see defies easy description. This is not a ruin in the classical sense, not weathered stone walls merging gently back into landscape. This is violent decay, aggressive destruction. A building dying in slow motion, but dying nonetheless. Every surface tells a story of surrender. The Gothic towers that once defined the skyline now end in jagged breaks, as if some giant hand reached down and snapped them off mid-height. The remaining sections lean at angles that seem to defy physics, their internal structures compromised, but not quite collapsed. Birds nest in the gaps, coming and going through openings that were never intended as doorways. Their droppings coat the stone in white streaks that look like tears. The windows, those carefully designed openings meant to frame views of the Catskill valleys, are now just holes. Most of the glass is gone, shattered by weather or vandals or simple age. A few fragments remain, caught in twisted lead frames, creating kaleidoscope effects when sunlight passes through. The window frames themselves are rotting, wood expanding and contracting with moisture until it splits and separates. In some cases, entire window assemblies have fallen inward, leaving rectangular voids that look like missing teeth. Enter through the main doors, if you dare, and the flooded basement immediately announces itself. Not through sight, because the stairs descend into darkness, but through smell. The water below carries the scent of rot and minerals, of things growing that should not grow, of organic matter breaking down in cold, still conditions. The smell alone is enough to turn most visitors back. Those who continue find stairs slick with moisture, treads missing, railings rusted through. One misstep means a fall into water of unknown depth, contaminated with debris and fungus. The Great Hall, Ralph's masterpiece, exists in a state of ruined grandeur. The vaulted ceiling is partially collapsed, sections of plaster and lath hanging down, like frozen waterfalls. The marble fireplace remains intact, surprisingly, though stained black by water damage. Graffiti covers the walls in layers, each generation of visitors adding their marks to those who came before. Some spray paint is bright and fresh. Some has faded to ghost traces, barely visible against the deteriorating plaster. Light enters the hall through broken windows and gaps in the roof, creating dramatic shafts that illuminate airborne dust and spores. The effect is almost religious, like light through cathedral windows, except everything here speaks of abandonment rather than devotion. The floor is treacherous, covered in debris ranging from broken glass to fallen plaster to unidentifiable organic matter. Walking requires constant attention. Every step could hide a hazard. The famous marble staircase still exists but no longer functions. Individual steps have separated from their moorings, creating gaps that make climbing suicidal. The handrail, once polished to perfection, is covered in rust and grime. Where the stairs turn at the landing, an entire section has collapsed, leaving a void that drops directly to the floor below. Yet the staircase retains its essential shape, its dramatic curve, enough that you can imagine how it must have looked when new, how Ralph must have pictured elegant figures ascending and descending in evening dress. Upstairs, the bedrooms that never housed sleepers are in various states of collapse. Some floors are intact, others have holes that open onto the rooms below. The wallpaper, installed over a century ago, but never witnessed by the family it was meant to please, hangs in strips and sheets. Where it remains attached, you can still see the patterns. Victorian designs of flowers and scrollwork, now spotted with mold and water damage. It is beautiful and grotesque simultaneously. The towers are accessible but extremely dangerous. The spiral staircases inside them are missing random steps. The walls show cracks, wide enough to put your hand through. Climbing to the top means risking death, but the view supposedly justifies the danger. From the tower heights, you can see for miles across the Catskills, the same view Ralph Dundas saw when he chose this location. The landscape has barely changed. The castle has changed completely. The flooded basement draws the most attention and the most speculation. The water is several feet deep in most areas, deeper in others. It reflects the ceiling above, creating mirror images of decay. Brave or foolish explorers have waded into it, reporting that the bottom is uneven, that objects rest beneath the surface, that the cold seeps through clothing and into bones within minutes. No one knows exactly what lies underwater, what might have fallen or been thrown there over the decades. Modern technology has documented the castle extensively. Drone footage shows the damage from above, revealing patterns invisible from ground level. High-resolution photographs capture details that the naked eye might miss. Urban explorers post videos touring the interior, their cameras showing what it feels like to move through those spaces. Yet something essential always escapes capture. The photographs are beautiful but incomplete. They show what the castle looks like, but not what it feels like. And the feeling is everything. The castle in its current state is exactly what Ralph Dundas feared and tried to prevent through quality construction and obsessive attention to detail. It is impermanent, mortal, actively dying. The Scottish stonemasons built well, but even their skills cannot defeat time and abandonment. The building proves that nothing lasts that all human work eventually returns to chaos, that permanence is an illusion we tell ourselves to make the work seem worthwhile. Yet even in this state, or perhaps especially in this state, the castle commands attention. It is more photogenic now than it ever was when new. More interesting. More honest. The ruin tells the truth about human ambition in ways the completed building never could have. We are temporary. Our works are temporary. The only permanence is change itself. The curse question persists. Over a century after Ralph Dundas died, people still debate whether the castle is genuinely haunted or merely saturated with suggestion and expectation. The evidence, such as it is, falls into categories that resist easy interpretation. Start with the documented incidents. Over the decades, numerous visitors have reported similar experiences despite having no contact with each other. The feeling of being watched is nearly universal among those who spend time inside. Cold spots appear in specific locations regardless of season or weather. Electronic devices behave erratically, cameras malfunctioning, phones losing battery power at impossible rates, recording equipment picking up sounds that were not audible to human ears during the actual visit. The apparitions, when reported, follow patterns. The woman in Victorian dress appears most frequently at the tower windows, always looking out toward the valley, never acknowledging observers. Some claim she is Ralph's wife, eternally waiting for a homecoming that will never occur. Others suggest she represents all the women who never lived in the castle, a collective ghost of domesticity denied. A few skeptics note that Victorian dress is generic enough that anyone seeing a vaguely female shape in dim light might interpret it that way. The male figure on the staircase, described by multiple witnesses including some of the Masons during their occupation, is more specific. He wears clothing from the 1880s, dark suit and high collar. He stands at the landing where the stairs turn, the exact spot where Ralph would have stood to survey progress on the construction. He does not speak or move, simply stares, and then is gone. Photographs taken of the staircase sometimes show anomalies, shadows that look almost human, shapes that were not visible when the picture was taken. The sounds are the most common paranormal claim. Footsteps echo through empty rooms, heavy and measured, as if someone is pacing. Music, always described as a waltz, drifts from the great hall despite the absence of any instrument. Voices carry through the corridors, multiple people engaged in conversation, but the words are never quite clear enough to understand. Workers doing repairs during the Masonic period reported hearing hammering and sawing, the sounds of construction coming from areas of the building where no one was working. Animals react strongly to the castle. Dogs refuse to enter, pulling against leashes and whining. Birds avoid nesting in certain sections while crowding into others. One local hunter reported that deer paths circle around the property rather than crossing through it, as if the animals sense something humans cannot. This behavior persists regardless of season or food availability, suggesting it is not merely a learned response, but something instinctual. The string of misfortunes connected to the property is harder to dismiss. Ralph died before moving in. His wife was institutionalized. Every attempt to use or occupy the building has failed within years. People injured while exploring the ruins report that their accidents felt somehow inevitable, as if the building itself arranged their falls or cuts. 2 explorers have died on the property over the decades, both in circumstances that seem disproportionate to the actual danger involved. Yet every supernatural claim has a rational explanation. The cold spots could be drafts in a building with no intact windows. The electronic malfunctions might result from moisture and temperature fluctuations. The apparitions could be tricks of light and shadow in a structure designed for dramatic visual effects. The sounds might be wind moving through damaged architecture, creating acoustic phenomena. The animal behavior might respond to structural instability or chemical contamination rather than ghosts. The injuries and deaths, tragic as they are, match the expected outcomes when people enter unsafe ruins. Buildings kill without needing curses. Gravity and decay are supernatural enough. The misfortunes that befell Ralph and subsequent owners could be coincidence, or the natural result of attempting something fundamentally impractical. Building a Gothic castle in the Catskills was cursed by economics and logistics before any ghost got involved. What cannot be easily explained is the cumulative effect, the way experiences layer on top of each other to create something beyond individual incidents. The castle affects people. This is documented across generations and demographics. Skeptics enter dismissive and leave unsettled. Believers arrive looking for ghosts and find something harder to name, a quality of wrongness that has nothing to do with transparent figures or mysterious sounds. Perhaps the curse is not supernatural, but psychological. The building embodies failure so completely that it infects anyone who engages with it seriously. Ralph failed to create a home. The Masons failed to maintain their lodge. Every explorer fails to fully capture or understand it. The castle is a monument to failure, and spending time in its presence means confronting your own inevitable failures, your own mortality, your own inability to create anything permanent. Or perhaps the curse is architectural. Gothic revival was about importing European forms into American spaces, forcing old world aesthetics onto new world landscapes. The style never quite fit in the Catskills. The castle was wrong from the beginning, not morally but aesthetically, a violation of proportion and place. Buildings have psychological effects based on their design. Gothic architecture was meant to inspire awe and direct thoughts toward mortality and transcendence. This particular Gothic building does exactly what it was designed to do, just without the religious framework to make those feelings comfortable. The truth about the curse, like most truths about the castle, is probably mundane and disappointing. The building is not actively malevolent. It does not target people for destruction. What it does is exist as a reminder, a physical manifestation of impermanence in a culture obsessed with legacy and lasting achievement. We call it cursed because acknowledging what it actually represents is harder than believing in ghosts. But stand alone in that flooded basement at dusk, water reflecting the decaying ceiling, cold seeping into your bones, shadows moving in ways that might be nothing or might be something. And the distinction between supernatural curse and natural consequence becomes irrelevant. The castle is haunted, if not by ghosts, then by everything it represents, everything it failed to be, everyone who died before seeing it complete. The curse is real, just not in the way people expect. The castle stands today as Ralph Dundas never imagined it would. Not a home filled with warmth and laughter, not a symbol of love made permanent in stone, but something stranger and perhaps more powerful. A ruin that speaks more eloquently in its failure than it ever could have in success. Consider what the Gothic palace has become over the century and a half since its construction began. It is one of the most photographed abandoned buildings in America, its image circulating through countless websites and social media feeds. More people have seen this castle in its ruined state than would have ever visited it as a functioning home. Ralph built it to impress a small circle of wealthy peers. Instead, it impresses millions who will never stand in its shadow but recognize something essential in its decay. The castle teaches lessons Ralph never intended to impart. It demonstrates that wealth cannot guarantee permanence, that the most carefully planned dreams can become nightmares, that buildings have their own destinies, independent of their creator's intentions. Every teenager who spray paints the walls, every photographer who captures its Gothic silhouette, every urban explorer who risks injury to walk its halls, they are all responding to what the ruin represents rather than what it was meant to be. What does it represent? different things to different observers. To some, it is a cautionary tale about hubris, about a man who reached too far and paid the price. To others, it is romantic, a monument to a love so grand it required a castle, even if that love was ultimately consumed by obsession. For many, it simply represents the truth about all human endeavor. We build, we dream, we plan, and time renders it all equally meaningless and equally meaningful. The castle's future is uncertain, but predictable. It will continue to decay, more slowly than one might expect thanks to the quality of that original construction, but decay nonetheless. Eventually, decades or perhaps a century from now, it will collapse entirely. The towers will fall, the walls will crumble, the stone will scatter across the mountainside, and vegetation will cover what remains. Future hikers might stumble across foundation stones and wonder what once stood there, or they might miss the ruins entirely, just another bump in the landscape. But until that final collapse, the castle serves its strange purpose. It draws people to contemplate mortality and impermanence. It provides a physical space for experiencing the sublime in decay. It stands as proof that our most ambitious projects might fail and yet still matter, might crumble and yet still speak to something deep in the human psyche that needs to see beauty in destruction. Ralph Dundas wanted to build something that would last forever, a physical manifestation of eternal love. He succeeded, but not in the way he planned. The castle will not last forever. Nothing does. But it has already lasted far longer as a ruin than it ever would have lasted as a home. Houses require maintenance, inhabitants, purpose. Ruins require only gravity and time, and those are endlessly patient. The story of the cursed castle is ultimately the story of every human life writ large in stone and mortar. We are born with intentions and dreams. We build what we can with the resources and time available. We pour our hearts into projects that we believe will outlast us. And then we die, and what we built takes on its own life, its own meaning, independent of our intentions. The castle is us. We are the castle. Ambitious, flawed, temporary, and somehow still significant. Stand at the base of those Gothic walls and look up. What you see is not failure. What you see is transformation. Ralph Dundas built a castle for love, and it became a castle for contemplation. He built it to celebrate life, and it became a meditation on death. He built it to last forever, and it is lasting exactly as long as it needs to, teaching lessons he never intended about the beautiful impermanence of everything we create. The Catskill Mountains will eventually reclaim every stone. The Scottish mason's foundation will crack and settle. The marble staircase will become gravel. The Gothic spires will return to the earth from which they were forced. This is not tragedy but inevitability, not curse but nature. The castle is not being destroyed. It is being released, freed from the burden of being something it was never meant to be, allowed finally to become nothing, which is what everything becomes eventually. But for now, in this moment, the castle still stands. Broken, flooded, dangerous, magnificent. A Gothic palace no one lived in, a dream no one realized, a curse that might be nothing more than the weight of disappointed expectations. It stands as the most honest building in America, because it has nothing left to hide. It cannot pretend to be anything other than exactly what it is. A structure dying slowly, dramatically, beautifully, teaching everyone who encounters it the same lesson about impermanence and the futility and necessity of grand ambition. Ralph Dundas built this castle. Time made it immortal, not by preserving it, but by destroying it in the most photogenic, meaningful, eloquent way possible. The curse, if it exists, is simply this: the castle will never be forgotten, but it will never be what it was meant to be. It will stand forever in memory and photographs, but never as a home, only as a ruin, only as a lesson, only as proof that our grandest dreams matter precisely because they fail, because in their failure they become something larger than success ever could have made them. The Gothic palace in the Catskills is dead. Long live the Gothic palace in the Catskills. If this story of ambition, obsession, and beautiful decay moved you, if you found yourself captivated by Ralph Dundas and his impossible dream, hit that like button right now. And if you want to explore more forgotten places where human ambition met spectacular failure, where history left its most haunting marks, subscribe to this channel. Because the world is full of cursed castles and abandoned dreams, and every one of them has a story that deserves to be told. What will you build that time will transform? What dreams will you chase that become something you never imagined? The castle is watching, the ruins are waiting, and your story, like Ralph's, has already begun.